The music inside the grand estate throbbed like a trapped wasp rattling against crystal. It was too loud, too refined, and far too artificial. Daniel Reeves stepped out into the cool night, his tailored charcoal suit suddenly feeling less like clothing and more like a suit of armor he couldn't remember putting on. His chest was tight, his pulse measured, and all he wanted was air, the kind that didn't reek of champagne and polite lies. Before we dive into this story, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Now, let's get into it. He followed a narrow stone path behind the house, flanked on both sides by meticulously pruned rose bushes. The garden had been Clara's idea. She called it timeless and romantic when they had it installed 3 years ago. Now, tiny strands of fairy lights draped overhead, spilling a soft golden glow across the white trellis where she often sat sipping wine in the evenings. That was where Daniel saw her. She wasn't alone. The man, Oliver Hayes, was leaning in far too close, speaking low. Clara's fingers toyed with the lapel of Oliver's jacket like it was a fabric she owned, and then it happened. A kiss. Not rushed, not guilty, slow and deliberate, like to people who had done it before and fully intended to do it again. Daniel froze, his jaw tightened, his chest went still. No surge of adrenaline, no urge to yell, just an icy, immovable awareness settling deep in his bones. Then came her laugh, that same breathy sound she used to make after 2 glasses of Pinot Noir on their back porch. He had loved that laugh once. Tonight, it cut through him like a blade. When Clara noticed him, her smile faltered for only a second before something colder took over. Acceptance. She stepped back from Oliver, smoothed the satin of her emerald dress, and brushed past Daniel without a word. Her perfume, the one she'd worn since their 3rd anniversary, drifted over him. Once it had meant love. Now it stank of betrayal. Oliver lingered under the trellis a moment too long before disappearing into the house like a coward. Daniel stood alone among the roses, hands buried in his pockets, his thumbs pressed hard against the cold metal of his keys. He didn't storm inside or cause a scene. That wasn't his way. He had spent 20 years solving problems on construction sites, at union meetings, and across negotiation tables without ever raising his voice. But something shifted in him in that garden. It wasn't the kind of rage that burned bright and burned out. This was cold, sharp, and deliberate. The kind that calcifies into steel. One rose caught his eye. Its stem had snapped, petals still lush and red, but broken all the same. He picked it up, twirling it between calloused fingers. That kiss under the trellis hadn't been a mistake. It was a decision. And now, he would make his own. He slipped the rose into his jacket pocket and walked back inside. The chandeliers in the main hall glimmered over polished floors as conversation buzzed around him. No one here had seen what he'd just witnessed. No one knew. He moved past Clara's colleagues, lawyers, brokers, self-important wine club regulars, without a word, and made his way to the study. Once inside, he closed the double doors and poured himself 2 fingers of bourbon. Upstairs, he heard her laugh again. She was back to performing the role of gracious hostess, her mask perfectly in place. That was when he knew this wasn't a one-time lapse. This had been going on for a while. Daniel set his glass down and pulled a leather-bound notepad from the desk drawer. He wrote a single word at the top of the page. War. Not the kind with shouting or slammed doors. No, his war would be quiet, methodical, and thorough. He began listing assets, accounts, properties, investments, then names. Oliver's first, underlined twice, followed by Clara's closest associates. Finally, a box labeled evidence. He knew how to build things that lasted. Houses, contracts, strategies. Now he'd build a case. That night, after Clara drifted off to sleep, Daniel stood in the doorway watching her. Her phone sat glowing on the nightstand, still unlocked with the same code she'd always used. Her father's birthday. She trusted him not to look. That was her mistake. Text after text, photo after photo, lunches, hotel rooms, whispered jokes about him. He forwarded everything to a hidden folder on his laptop. Then came her work email. More proof than the financial records. Joint funds spent on her affair. Within a week, Daniel had a spreadsheet, dozens of screenshots, invoices, and photographs from a private investigator he'd quietly hired. Every piece of it neat, time-stamped, undeniable. When the time was right, he staged what Clara thought was a reconciliation trip to a remote cabin. While she sipped wine by the fire, he sent 2 emails. One to her firm's board of directors, outlining ethics violations and misuse of company funds, and another to Oliver's employer, flagging inappropriate conduct. He scheduled them for the following morning. At 8:03 a.m., the first went out. At 8:06, the second. By the time they returned home, the storm had already formed. Clara's phone lit up with messages from her boss. She called it a misunderstanding. Daniel simply sipped his coffee. By week's end, she was on unpaid leave. Oliver was pulled from a major account. Daniel kept moving. The divorce petition came next, fault-based, backed by evidence so airtight her attorney could do nothing but negotiate her surrender. By the final court date, Daniel had secured the house, the vehicles, and 80% of their assets. Clara was left with a rented apartment and a ruined reputation. Oliver vanished entirely. Weeks later, Daniel sent her a letter. Not gloating, not apologizing, simply stating the truth. You built your life on lies. I refused to let them define mine. Every step you felt unravel was a consequence of your choices. This is the end of your chapter, and the beginning of mine. When she called to ask if it had been worth it, Daniel paused, listening to the quiet of the house. His house now. You left me no choice, he said, and hung up. Would you like me to also make a more cinematic, thriller-like rewrite of this, so it feels even more like a tense novel scene that could amplify the atmosphere and tension even further?